Hello guys, welcome to Blue Tech Empire Python tutorials. In this video, we are going to be looking at the range function. Python range function has a lot of uses. It's usually used to generate the sequence of numbers, and it's very important for iterating through loops for iterating through sequences. When we are going to be looking at the while loop and the for loop, the range function is very important. That's why I want to teach it before. I want us to look at it before covering while loops and for loops. So we are going to look at the range function and followed by the print function. Those are very important functions to know and fully understand before looking at loops in Python. So the range function helps, an inbuilt function that helps you to generate a sequence of numbers. You can generate a sequence of numbers moving forwards, moving backwards. That's like in descending order, in increasing order, or even with gaps in between them. For example, 2, 4, 6, 8, and all kinds of stuff. So the range function is very important. So I'm going to be showing you the general structure of the function definition of the range function, the structure. So let's look at the different parts of the range function. So here is a typical example of the structure of the range function from jigs4jigs.org. I got it from there. There are many examples online. If you go on Google, you'll be able to see various example diagrams. So the range function actually has three parts. We have range and followed by three numbers. Now, and the three numbers or the three values, it's like a function. So we have three possible parameters, but the last two parameters are optional. The first parameter is the the first parameter is the start index. The second parameter is the end index, or the index one position above the end index, and the last parameter is the step. So you can ignore two of the or you can use only the first parameter. Sorry, you can use only the first parameter as required, which in that case will be the end index. If you have two parameters, the first one is the start index, like we have here 0, and the second one will be the end index. If you have just one parameter, that's going to be the end index. It's assumed the start index is 0. So if you have only one parameter, the start index is assumed to be 0. Now, if you have two parameters, the first one will represent the start index and the second one will represent the end index. Now, if you have three parameters, the first one will represent the start index, the second one will represent the end index, and the last parameter will represent what we call the step. The step is the gaps or the gaps between each successful value. For example, this example of range actually returns the range from 0 right up to 9. As you can see, the end index is not included in the generated numbers. So we actually have numbers from 0 right up to 9. Now let's ignore the 2. That's the last. Let's assume we have just range 0, 10. Now in this case, it's going to produce a range of numbers from 0 right up to 9. Remember, the last index, the stop index, is not part of the generated number. So now in case, let's say we bring in the last parameters to the function, which is 2, or it can be 3, 4, 5, any number of your choice. By default, Python assumes it to be 1. So 1 means you have gaps of 1, which is normal for integer numbers. 0, 1, 2, those are gaps of 1. Assume we have a gap of 2. So if the first number is 0, the second is going to be 2, the third is going to be 4, the fourth is going to be 6, the fifth is going to be 8, and we can't have 10 since 10 is the stop index. So here's the typical output of this range function, that's 0, 10, 2. We see we have 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. So that's because we have a step of 2. In case we don't have the step, we're going to have 0 right up to 9. So now let's look at some example on the Python interpreter using the console so you can see how this actually works. All right, so here is an example of the range function. Here is the Python interpreter. So on the console, I'm going to be showing you first. You need to know the range function returns a range object. A range object can be indexed. So for example, let's say var let's say var1 equals to range, and what we had was 0 right up to 10. Now let's print var1. I want to show you something. Var1, you see, it prints range 0 to 10. Now you can be confused. You thought it returned 0 to 10. Yes, it returned 0 to 10 in the form of a range object. Now a range object can be indexed. For example, let's say var1 0. You see, the first item is 0. We have the second item is 1. We have the third item is 2. We have, right, let's see the fifth item. We have up to, I think, the ninth item, and we don't have a 10 item, I guess. All right, so we have 0 to 9 items. As you can see, it generated 0 to 9. Now let's say, for example, we have var1 equals to range, let's say 20, and we have gaps of say 3. In this case, we can also check the indices. Let's see, we may not have a 9 indices. Let's check the fifth index 15. Let's check the 6th index. Okay, now this doesn't really look good, because if you want to extract the values created by the range function, you need to index them. Now we can convert a range function to a list, a tuple, or a set. You understand? So I think those are it's possible to convert the range object. You see here we have a range object returned. Let me do it again so you see range 0 to, let's say, 30. You see, it returned a range object. Now let's convert that range object to a list. So we'll say list range 0 to 30. You can see now we have a list. So it's simple. We can create a list from a range object by simply writing, for example, list1 equals to list, then now range, and let's say 0 to let's say 20. Okay, so let's print out list1. We can as well do that for a tuple. Let's say tuple, let's just call it t1 equals to, this time let's add a gap, let's say gap of 2. So let's print out t1. All right, so t1 should be a tuple, not a list, sorry, tuple. All right, so let's look at t1. Yeah, you can as well have a set called s1. In that case, s1, let's have a gap of say let's say 5. Or let's look at s1 now. Okay, I need to use sets. We need to convert it to a set, as you see here. So let's look at s1. All right, so here is a set. So these are the common sequences you would like to convert a range function to. So remember, what you should take note is when you use the range function, it actually returns a range object. That range object can be indexed, like how we saw. You can say range 0 to 10. I told you if you have just a single value, it's considered to be 10. The start index is considered to be 0. So you can check the feed position. You see it returned 5. It's the same as saying maybe reg, for example, equals to range 10, and you come and say reg index 5. Yeah, so but this is not usually convenient. That's why most of the times you will prefer to convert it, for example, to a list. It's equals, or let's say list equals to, we can say now range start from 0, end at 20, and in that case we can convert it to a lists. All right, so we have that. So let's look at the list. So we see 0 to 19. Like I told you, the end index is not included in the range of numbers generated. So since we are having this, let's look at let's say we start from 0, of course, or let's start from 1 this time, end at 21, so we can have 20, and let's have a gap of 2. So look at list now. As you can see, started from 0, skip 1 because we have a gap of 2. We have step 2, so we have 3, 5. And remember, it generates from 1 right up to 20. So 21, let's say 20 because 21 is the end index and it's not part of the range generated. If you want to see this clearly, I can just write list like this so you see what's generated. You see, or let's do like this so you see clearly. Let's do like this, lst. You can see 0 to 20. 21 was the stop index, but 21 is not part of the generated list. So I just wanted you to note that. What next? So we're going to be looking at more stuff. So now let's look more into the 3 parameters of the range function. So let's have our normal range. Like I told you first, let's start from basics. Sorry. When you have a single parameter, for example, let's just return it directly on the console. So if you have, for example, 10, it generates 0 to 9. If you want to generate 0 to 10, use 11. All right, remember, I'm converting it to a list. That's why you see a list generated. Here, I've converted the range object returned to a list. All right, now, so what next? Now, if we have 2 parameters, the first one is considered to be the start and the second one is considered to be the end. Okay, in the case of 1, the start index is considered to be 0. So if we want to generate from 11 to 30, or let's say from 10 to 30, we're gonna use 31. Good. All right, now what next? Say we have a third parameter, like I told you, it's 1 by default. You understand? So let's say we use 2, you see the output. Let's say we use 3, we see the output. So you see it generates from steps of 3. All right, let's go a little backwards, like we're starting from 5. So we have more outputs. Now let's take 4. All right, so we have a step of 4. I guess you see that clearly. Now, what next? We have seen we can use 3 parameters. Let's say we have 2 here. And I've showed you how you can index it. And now you're ready to use the range function. But there's something you need to know. The range, the first parameter, for example, let's say we have 5 here, must be less than the second parameter. What does that indicate? It means you can use negative number. Remember, your step cannot be a float. For example, if you say 12.5, it's going to fail. Okay, object cannot be interpreted as an integer. Now you have let's say we have 2. Okay, now in this case, let's say we know the first value here should be less than the second. That's the start value must be less than the second. Since we know our step is positive, it means it moves from 5 upwards. We can have a negative step. In that case, it's going to move from the start index downwards up to the end index. But we're going to look at that later on. So let's look at this first. Now consider this. All right, consider this. Now let's say let's not worry about this. Okay, now let's say we want to generate numbers from negative 10 to 10. Remember, negative 10 is less than 10, so we can start from negative 10 right up to 10. Remember, by default the step is 1, so it's going to move from negative 10, let's say 20 to 20. Let's see, yeah, or let's say 10. Looks like, all right, so you see it starts from negative 10 right up to positive 9. To make it positive 10, we should specify 11. So now let's say we can also add a range. If we say a range of 2, you're going to see it's going to say negative 10. It moves upward. Remember, negative is less than positive. All right, now let's say let's try to, if you have let's say if we want to move from a lower number to a bigger number, look, nothing is going to be generated because by default the step is 1. So you see the list is empty. Why? Because we try to move from 10 to negative. It's going to move from 10 upwards. The second is lower than the first, so the list is going to be empty because you can't move from 10 to negative 10 positively. It must be negative. Oh, we can do it negatively. So if you want to do that negatively, it means if you want to move backward, use a negative step. I told you by default the step is +1, so you can indicate -1. This is very possible now because you can start from 10 moving backwards to -11. So you're going to see the output now starts from 10, it moves backward right up to -10 because -11 cannot be part of the output. You can also use -2, you see, to move so you can do -3. So we see we have steps of 3, but remember in this case we are moving backwards because our step is negative. Okay, so in the case where you're moving backwards, your start index must be greater than your end index. In this case, you see the start index is bigger than the end index, and that's because we want to move backwards. Okay, if you try to move forward in this case, you're going to have an empty list because you can't start from 10 and move forward to -10. Okay, so that's why we have a negative index. Now let's see, so you've seen your start index can also be negative. Okay, like we saw in the previous, you saw your start index can be negative. For example, if you're starting at -10, you can even want to go right backward to -30 and steps of 2. So you have to know if you're moving backwards, you have to use a negative step, and if you're moving backwards, your start index must be less than, let's say, must be greater than your end index. If you're moving forward, your start index must be less than your end index. So yeah, basically is the I think these are the main things you need to understand about the range function, that you can also have a negative start, negative end, and negative step. So and remember, you can convert the range function to not only a list, you can also convert it to a tuple, you can also convert it to a set, and other objects we ain't going to look at now. All right, you can't convert it to a dictionary because a dictionary needs a tuple, a pair of tuples, because one needs to act as the key and one needs to act as the value. So we can't convert it directly to a dictionary except we do some programming. We have to write a small amount of code for that. All right, so let's look at few examples of the range function, or how you can use range function in a real program. All right. All right, now here is a piece of program. As you can see, it's a very simple one in that case. Uh, let's run this program to see what happens. All right, so here you can see the first range function just has one parameter. So like I told you, it assumes the start is 0, the end is 10, and the step is 1. So it's going to generate numbers from 0 to 9, and we convert it to a list, so it's going to generate a list, and here is the output list from 0 to 9. The second one uses a tuple. It converts the range object to a tuple. Remember, here we're starting from 1 because we have two parameters. The first one is considered to be the start index, the second the end index. So we have 1 to 12. Remember, the end index is not part of the numbers generated, so we have 1 to 12, and you can see here var2 is 1, has 1 to 12, and remember it's a tuple because we use the tuple function. Okay, so next let's look at var3 list range. We have three parameters here. So the first parameter is the start index, the second is the end index, and the third is the step. You can see here we have start 12 and 12, start 1 and 12, and range 2. So we're going to have 1, 3, 6, and so on, right up to some number, but 12 cannot be part, it must be right up to 11. But if 11 is not a multiple of 3, so we're going to have, I think, 9 or so. So as you can see, okay, 1, 3, okay, 11 is going to appear. So here you can see about 3, we have 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then 11. So we have a step of 2. Now we use the tuple again. We have a start index of 0, and we have an end index. We have a start index of 10, and we have an end index of 0. Now notice the start index is greater than the end index. It means we can only move backwards. So that's why we have a negative step of 1. So this is going to start from 10, then it's going to move backward right up to 0. So you see, but 0 is not going to be included, so it's going to end at, I think, 1 or so. So here we have 10 right up to 1. Now we have another one. We have start index 10, end index 0. Here we have multiples of 2, that's steps of 2. So we're going to have 10, 8, 6, right up to not 0, but it should be 1. So here we see, but 1 is not a multiple of 2, so you're going to see it's going to end at 2 if you follow it up. So here we have a tuple, we have start index 2, end index 11, step 2, so it's going to end at 10, starting from 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, because 11 cannot be part of the generated, and neither is 11 a multiple of 2, so 11 can't appear even if it was 12 we had here. Even if we had something like 12 here, we still going to end at a 10, because 12 can't be part. So um, here we go. All right. So as you can see, we still ended at 10 for verse 6. All right, so verse 7, we have this range from -5 to 5. The start is smaller, the end is bigger. So it's okay to have a step of 1, which is the default. So it's going to start from -5 right up to 5. As you can see, -5 right up to, 4, because 5 cannot be part of the generated output, and we converted it to a list. The next one, we're going to see range 1, 2. In this case, we have a start index of 1 and we have an end index of 2. As you can see, 2 is like moving from 1 to 1, so the list is going to be empty, because let's see, it's going, okay, 1 is going to be parts, but that's all. We're just going to have 1, because it starts from 1 and it ends at 1. So it's an empty, it's a list with 1, with a single item 1. Now here we're trying to move from 1 to -1. In this case, the start index is bigger than the end index, and we're having a step of +1. So in that case, there's not going to be any inputs. We're going to have an empty list, because you can't move from a smaller from a bigger number to a smaller number using a positive index. In case we use -1 here, that's when we have, if we specify -1 as the index, in that case we'll move backwards. So I think we'll have 1 and 0 as part of the yeah, we have 1 and 0, because the first item is 1, moving backward will equal to 0 and -1, but -1 can't be part of the result, so it ends at 0. So the last one, we convert to a tuple. We have range 1, -1, 1. All right, so here is what I wanted to try to explain. Up this, like we same stuff we had up, except for the fact here we're converting it to a tuple, while here we're converting it to a list. So here is a basic example that makes you to properly understand the different parts of the range function. So next, we're going to look at a typical example where you want to use the range function, or a real application of the range function while iterating or within a for loop. All right, so let's look at that example. All right, so let's look at this example. Here we have a list of animals in alphabetical order, A to Z, and we want to display those animals using a for loop. We are going to look at for loop later on, but just understand the for loop will loop through the animals list, and each time animal, for example, we have for animal in animals, animals is the list. Each time the loop iterates, animal is going to have a value, if one of the is going to have one of the, if its value is going to be one of the items in the list, and it's going to move in a sequential order. The first loop is going to be an antelope, the second one on blobfish, the third time on crocodile. So as the loop moves continuously up to the point where it's going to be on zebra. So each time we have a start index. The first time the loop iterates, index will be 1 and animal will be antelope. We increment index by 1, so now at this point index is 2. So the next time the loop is iterating, index here is going to be 2. Remember, here we have here is the placeholder for a value. We are going to look at the format inbuilt function later on when we learn strings and titles. So as you see, then here we have animals. So here we just, let me not stop you with this. We're going to learn this after, but here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see we have up to 25. Now, the simplest, what we can easily do here, instead of having an external variable index and incrementing, we can use the range function. And guess correctly, what we need to do is to create range from 1 right up to length of animals. For example, if animals, the length of animals here should be 25. So we're going to create from 1 to 26. So you understand? So the range is going to give us indices from, or let's say we're going to create from, yes, it's going to give us indices from 1 to 26. But the problem is when it comes to a list, our indices start from 0. Okay, so we're going to use a little trick. So I'm just going to show you the trick. So instead of this, let's just say for index, forget about this index here, for index in range. You see, we're just going to say for index in range, we want to start from 0, and we want to end in the len of the list, len of animals. This is all. So we're just going to say for index in range. Okay, now we're just going to print like we did. Placeholder is placeholder dot format, and we have that was IntelliSense. All right, so the format is now what we want to do is to remember index is going to have the values generated by range. So the first time index is going to be at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right up to let's see. All right, right up to the len of list is 25, so it's going to end at 24. So it's going to give us from 0 to 24. I think here we have actually from 0 to 24, so we have valid indices. But now instead of putting range here, because it starts from 0 and want to start from 1, we're just going to write index plus 1, index plus 1, and the next part we're just going to write animals. Don't worry if you don't understand this. When we learn the for loop, you're going to understand most of these animals and index. The reason why we have plus 1 is that the range function starts from 0, but we want to start leveling from 1. But now we need to index starting from 0. So we use this index we use the index value to index the animal list, but when we are counting, we add 1 to the index value. So let's see how this simplified version of our code is. All right, so we have the same stuff. So I just want to show you can use the len function, the range function, sorry, to create a range of indices, and then use those indices to index a sequence. That's simple. All right, so let's say for example we don't want to we want to get even number of items, not all the items, so we can just simply use a step of 2 in this case. So let's see what happens here. You see, this would have been difficult with the if we had to use the external index variable. So let's see the output here. Very easy. So you see we have 1, 3 and the stuff. Now let's see what if we want a step of 4. Let's see the output. All right, so I just want to show you. Now it's very simple. What if you want to reverse the list? So to print it in reverse order, what we do is we start from the length of the list minus 1. Remember, because the length of this list is 25, but it has 24 items. So index 25 does not exist. So we just say len of list, or the animal list, minus 1. So we start at 24 and we end at 0, or let's say -1. So it actually ends at 0. So then we have a step of -1. I think this should be good. Let's see. All right, so as you can see, we started from the end of the list and we are back at the beginning. You may say, oh, how is this important? But no, we can have a variable called animals reverse. Okay, and we can just append values to that animal reverse, so and then print it back. So in this case, you see, once we do that, we can just say animals reverse dot append. In this case now we just say animals, and we say index. So in this case we are using the index generated by the range indices generated by the range function to reverse our list. So let's print out, after this, let's print out reverse list, print out animal reverse. Okay, so as you can see, here we have a list of reversed. You see, we're starting from zebra right up to antelope. So we have used the range function. In this case, we use negative um, step, and we use a negative ending index. We started with a large, the end, that's the last index, and then we ended at negative one, which would be practically zero. And we use a backward step. So in this case, we have seen how we can use the negative end index of the range function to reverse a list. It's very important. You know, if you wanted to have a step of two, like picking only two items, you can create the following list and generate it stuff. So here we see a short list, zebra, and a few items since we are using a step of two. So practically you can do a lot with the range function, but I just wanted to show you a few applications of the range function. So here is the end of this video. In the next video, we are going to be taking a deeper look at into the print statement. You know, we are going to be looking at the end parameter and the separation parameter. You see, it's very important to know those two parameters when dealing with loops sometimes, because you want to print items horizontally and not vertically, and you need to know about the sep and the end parameter. So here's the end of this video, and see you in the next video. Have a nice time.